With more, we're joined by Ihsan Gardi from the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Good morning, Ihsan.
Good morning, Stefan.
So tell us why you think Islamophobia needs to be singled out, especially when the federal government has policies in place around diversity and against racism or, racial or religious discrimination.
Well, Stefan, we know for some time now that Islamophobia has been on the rise, and it's not just our organization that has been collecting data on this, but Statistics Canada. But at the same time, I think it should be recognized that this actual call is a call to address all forms of systemic discrimination, and it's a call at all levels of government. At the municipal level, to have hate crimes units provided with resources, and police services provided with the resources to do education and training, and also to make sure that those hate crimes units are actually reporting their data to their police services boards, as well as making those reports public. Right now, the data that we have from Statistics Canada is 2 years old, so it's 2 years after the fact. And then at the provincial level, we're calling on the provinces to create a mandatory course for secondary students to look at all forms of systemic racism and xenophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, and Islamophobia as well, of course. And as well, we're looking for the provincial governments to implement and create an anti-racism directorate, similar to the one that has been created in Ontario, that will again be looking at this from a holistic perspective. And finally, you mentioned at the federal level that we're calling for a day of remembrance and action on Islamophobia of January 29th. Yes, that's one call. The other call, quite important, is for members of parliament to support motion 103 put forward by Iqra Khalid, which basically calls for the creation of a parliamentary task force to look into and study the issue of systemic discrimination and racism in all of its forms from an evidence-based perspective. And this is not anything new. Parliamentary committees have done this before, looking at studying issues of anti-Semitism, for example. So this is nothing new, but it's important for us to do so that we're looking at the issue from an evidence-based perspective and making sure that we're looking at the broader context, doing a needs analysis, and ensuring that we are looking at this, again, from a long-term perspective and realizing that issues of hatred and discrimination have common themes, and it's important for us to be able to address them as a whole.
You mentioned training and education as desires. Have you looked at what kind of realistic or ideal timelines you'd like to see that implemented by?
Well, we're calling on the governments to at the different levels, and the provincial governments, again, to implement some training and resources for educators, because we're hearing reports, Stefan, of students being bullied by other students, students being bullied by teachers even. Our organization, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, has resources available. We have guides for educators to Islamic religious practices, a new guide to help educators deal with students who are experiencing issues related to geopolitical violence or Islamophobia. So some resources are already there and are available and are on our website, and we encourage people to access them. But we are here to offer our support and our assistance to governments at all levels to make sure that we're addressing this and recognizing that this impacts all of us. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us.
I mean, bullying amongst students is common, but you just said there's bullying between teachers to students as well. Is there a story that stands out that you can share with us?
Well, we've heard stories of teachers, putting students on the spot and asking them, for example, to explain, what is the Islamic State, right? And this is, without context, this is students' first exposure to Islam. And you're asking young students who may not be aware of all of the geopolitical issues going on around the world to try and explain to their classmates, what is the Islamic State? Never mind what is Islam. And we have other stories as well. So it's something that is a serious issue, and it's something that we feel needs to be addressed. And it's important that we look at this as something that we all have to be involved in. The Muslim community can't do this on its own, and it's important for government to play its role. It's important for Muslim communities and our fellow Canadians to play a role. And it's important that we ensure that we are making that media as well plays a role, right? Media, as they say, both mirrors and manufactures public discourse around various issues. So there's a responsibility media and our elected leaders and officials have as well to avoid the kind of inflammatory and Islamophobic rhetoric that we have seen not just south of the border and other parts of the world, people forget, about 16 months ago, we had an election in which Muslims and Islam were featured prominently in the election in a very, very negative manner. So it's important that that responsibility is recognized and that we have an open and honest discussion and, ensure that we're protecting and promoting our cherished value of freedom of expression, at the same time recognizing that that freedom of expression also has to be exercised with responsibility to make sure not to vilify and marginalize communities at risk.
Ihsan Gardi, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Stefan.